What's going on, everyone? Mitesh here with I'm Tech, and today we are talking about the iPhone XR. I've got my full review for you guys of this phone right here, but you know what? It's not going to be your typical review because you know what? It's an iPhone, guys. It's a phone made by Apple, and you know what? Apple really knows how to make phones well, so I'm not going to be covering the basics of this phone. Instead, I'm going to be covering the stuff that makes this phone different from the XS and XS Max to really tell you guys whether you should buy this phone or the XS or XS Max. So without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so we're going to start off by talking about the most controversial part of this phone, and that is, of course, the display. So, unlike the XS and XS Max, this display has an LCD panel, which, you know, not a big deal. iPhones have had LCDs in the past, and they've all been great, and you know what? This LCD panel is pretty great. The real controversy has been that resolution. So this thing has a resolution of, oh god, it's such a weird number. It's like 1792 by 828. Which people are calling like close to 720p because of the aspect ratio. And you know what? It is pretty close to 720p, but here's the thing. I think it's a great display. I don't think that low resolution really matters here because this panel is just really good and you're really not going to notice it if you use this phone like a normal person and don't get it super close to your face or put it under a microscope. You're not going to notice that low resolution on this because this display looks fantastic the way it is. Another thing to know about this display versus the XS and XS Max is the fact that it's got some relatively large bezels all around the display. Now, this is actually a really clever thing that Apple did. So if you guys know that most Android phones that have a notch, they also have a little tiny chin because they can't do what the iPhone does where they wrap the display around the screen to have room for the display connectors. Instead here, because it's an LCD panel, you can't actually wrap it around. So what they did was they actually just made the bezels even all around the screen, and you know what? It makes for something that I think looks nicer. I honestly think that more Android phones will do this next year if they can get away with it, because you know the fact that the bezels is the same all around just makes it seem like, you know, it's just meant to be that way. It's meant to have a little bit of bezels on the bottom. And yeah, it's a clever little trick. I think Apple is genius at marketing. And yeah, the fact is the bezels will just disappear after you start using it. You may notice them the first time, especially if you are in stores and you see this next to a XS or XS Max. But after that, they're just going to disappear. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the display differences. And honestly, I'll say it again, if you guys get this phone, you will not be disappointed by the display. I think it's fantastic. And the form factor here is really going to appeal to a lot of people. It looks really nice when you get it in hand. I'm not a big fan of how big this notch is, but you know what? It serves a purpose with that Face ID, which by the way, works pretty well. You know, I wasn't giving it that much credit in my 48 hours later video, but it does work really well. And one of the coolest things is if you're looking away from the display, it won't unlock. So sometimes I turn on the phone and then I look away, I'm talking to somebody else, and then it'll wait for me to actually look back at the camera and then it will unlock, which is really cool. So yeah, anyways, that's enough about the display. Let's move on to something else like the camera right here. So the camera on this thing is the exact same camera that is on the XS and XS Max, at least the normal one. They don't have a telephoto lens on here, as you guys can already see. And you know what? I don't think you're missing too much with a telephoto lens. I personally liked the idea of having a telephoto lens only because, you know, I've only ever had single camera phones so far. So I was kind of excited to get that, but with the XR, you are not getting that. And once again, I don't think it's a huge loss for most people. The telephoto lens usually tends to be worse than the single lens here. But anyways, the camera on this phone is really, really good. Apple has really stepped it up this year in terms of processing, and it really shows. So I did a camera comparison between this one and my Pixel 2 camera, and I gotta say, the iPhone can really hold its own. And like I said, the main shooter on this is the same as the XS and XS Max, so you guys can expect no difference in quality. You're just losing the secondary telephoto lens, and it will not be that big of a deal to most people. In fact, you can do portrait mode this year with that single lens, and once again, you guys should definitely go check out my Pixel 2 versus this camera video because I took a bunch of portrait pictures in there too, so definitely go check that out. I'll have a link to it up here and in the description below. But yeah, if you guys just know that if you're going to get this phone, the camera is fantastic and you're going to be happy with it. So far from the camera, let's move on to something else. And you know, there really isn't that much else left that's different between this and the XS and XS Max. Those are the main points, but performance. Let's talk about performance because I think for the price, people are going to think that the performance is going to be different on these phones. And the thing is, it's really not. They're using the exact same processor on this phone as they are on the XS and XS Max. So the XR has the same A12 Bionic as the XS and XS Max. So you guys will have amazing performance on this phone. It's really just, it just blazes through anything you want to do. It opens up apps really quickly. And yeah, everything just runs really smoothly. Now this does have one less gigabyte of RAM than the XS and XS Max do. They both have 4 gigabytes of RAM. This thing has 3 gigabytes of RAM. Will that make a big, huge difference? I don't know. I have noticed that some apps, you know, they close in the background while I'm doing other things, especially whenever I'm playing games. Other apps will just close in the background. When I try to go back to them, they'll just have to reload, which is annoying, but you know what? It's just the limitation of the RAM here. And I don't know that it's going to be that much different on the XS and XS Max since they only have 1 gigabyte more. So that's just a limitation of the phone itself. I mean, you're still getting amazing performance, especially when you compare it to any Android devices. So I really wouldn't worry about performance when you get the XR versus like the XS or XS Max. And finally, let's talk about the battery life, because this is actually one of those places where the XR is better than all the other phones. The XR is rated to have a better battery life than the XS and the XS Max, which is, you know, super impressive because this thing has the middle of the road battery. It's not the largest and it's not the smallest, but this thing, because of the lower resolution screen and because you probably have like that 1 less gig of RAM, you're using a lot less power when you're using this phone, so the battery lasts a lot longer. And for me personally, it's gotten through a day very easy. Now, for me, I don't charge like most people do. I charge my phone like in the morning for a little bit until it gets like between 80 and 90%, and then I just use it throughout the day. And most days I was finishing with like around 30%. So I would consider that really good, especially considering I was taking photos and, you know, just using my phone constantly. Even those days that I played games heavily, the battery never got to like below 20%. So I can say it, the battery life on this thing is really good. All right, and finally, let's talk about value. So that's really what it comes down to if you are considering getting this phone versus the XS and XS Max is, you know, what you're getting for your money is worth. And I think for your money, spending $750, getting almost everything the same as the XS and XS Max with a few differences like not having that secondary camera, like having a lower resolution LCD panel, I think this phone is definitely worth it. I think this phone should be the one that most people get this year. And yeah, I think unless you are the type of person that keeps your phone for like 3 years or more, I don't think it makes a ton of sense to go with a XS or XS Max, because if you're someone who just, you know, upgrades normally like every 2 years, or if you're someone who upgrades every year, the XR is probably the way to go. It's got almost all the features that the XS and XS Max do, especially with that horsepower and all that, the form factor, and it's a very nice size phone, which I think a lot of people will be happy about. Now, the people that are trying to upgrade from a 5S and want to keep that size, you are not going to be happy. Apple really doesn't have anything for you like that's comparable to this size, but maybe the XS is probably the one you want. But with that, that's pretty much all I have for you guys in this one. If you guys like this one, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to see more videos like this, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Bye!